Michael showed me a Meshech Chochma that he claimed is that Ezra is the bridge between the end of the Nevi'im and the Anshe Knesset Gdola. Am I correct? Is that what you were saying? Yeah. So I
Anshe Knesset Gdola, he says between the Nevuah and the explosion of Torah Shabbal Peh.
Right. So I don't disagree with you that he's actually the connection or the bridge between the two. I didn't see it so explicitly in the footnotes. I think, as you saw in the footnotes of Rav Kuperman, that Nevuah ended, and he was the cause of Torah Shabbal Peh being expanded. Correct?
The footnote is explicit. It's not explicit in the Meshech Chochma. The footnote says he's a gesher bein zeh lezeh.
Oh, it says the word gesher? I didn't see that. Oh, I
don't have it in front of me right now, but it's in footnote number 9, I think.
So I looked at footnote number 9. I have it. And footnote number 9.
I don't want to take up your time because it's 8:31 now, but I don't have it in front of me. But it
just in my footnote number 9, it says Nestaimut Kufas HaNevuah. That's all it says.
I'll take a look. Maybe it's
check it. But
I don't have it in front of me right now.
I want to mention, because we already spoke last week, that Reb Yaakov started off by saying that there's a concept of tkufot that we see from Sefer Shmuel and Sefer Shoftim. That's the way Rashi certainly understands Yoshua, Shoftim, and then Shmuel, that it's 3 different tkufot, and that the tkufot become new tkufot through a sefer. That's the Yesod Rashi brings. And Reb Yaakov is saying that's where Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi got his concept of tkufot. He got it from Moshe Kiltar Mesirim Shul. That's from Yehuda HaNasi talking, so to speak. And he's getting it from what Rashi points out, the 3 Svarim, right? He also mentioned that he says that Shmuel is the bridge between the Tkufas HaShoftim and Tkufas HaNevi'im, and that we have to say, that's muchrach from the text, because it said that Shmuel was a shofet. It says clearly in the text. And then also, Shmuel is also the first Navi. He becomes the first Navi. So we see that he was a bridge. And Reb Yaakov says that's the same bridge that Rav was between Tkufas Tanoim, Tkufas Amoraim. We'll talk more about that today. But Rav was the bridge in the sense he's Rav Tanu Polik. Don't ask from a bright on Rav. He's not going to get worried about it. He's like a Tana. Yet Rabbi Yochanan can disagree with Rav because he's also an Amora, right? So there you have the bridge. So so Rabbi Yaakov, he also says, he doesn't say exactly the bridge, but I'll talk about it in on page Shin Vav. I don't know if I gave you that page today again.
Last week.
Okay, so I'll just read for you. Utkufas HaNevi'im nechtru Malachi shoya achron HaNevi'im ukoloshan HaRambam perik tes milchas yisod Torah litzavos al divrei HaTorah ulazhira shlo yavru aleh kamo she'amar achron shebahem. Right? In other words, the Tkufas HaNevi'im, he says, ended with Malachi, the last Navi, and the Rambam's lashon is he was there to command about the Torah and to warn the Jews not to transgress Torah. Moshe Amar, like the last one said, Zichru Torah's Moshe Avdi. Right? In other words, he ends off his Tanach, basically, not Tanach, but Nach, or Nevi'im, I should say, not Nach, but Nevi'im, he ends off with Zichru Torah's Moshe Avdi, which Reb Yaakov understands. Ratzlo me'atav ve'elach tavar mesiras haTorah l'chacham shimtzabu ha'pitronot l'chol ha'shelos b'toch Torah's Moshe. That's why he says Zichru Torah's Moshe, because you can't go to Nevi'im anymore. Now, he's not talking about halacha here, because halacha, you don't go to Nevi'im anyway. He's talking about the broader Das Torah. You're going to have to learn it from the Chacham, not anymore from the Nevi'im, right? That's going to change now once at the end of Nevuah, right? So I just want to add that I'm certain that Rabbi Yaakov was held that Malachi is the bridge between the Tkufas HaNevi'im through Anshe Knesset Gdola, but it doesn't disagree with what you said, and I'll tell you why. because when you look at Malachi, right, the first chapter, Malachi, first pasuk, okay, Masa Dvar Hashem El Yisrael Biyad Malachi. Okay, you know what the Targum says. Take a look. Masa Dvar Hashem. He says, here, where is it? Oh, here. Matal Pitgamad Hashem Al Yisrael Biyad Malachi. That should be the end of the pasuk. Targum doesn't end it there. The Iskara Shmoy Ezra Safra. He is called Ezra Safra, meaning Malachi is not a proper name.
Wow.
It just means the hands of my messenger, who is Ezra. So there you got it. So it's not.
Wow.
Reb Yaakov doesn't disagree. Malachi's the end, but if you hold like Chazal, then it's Ezra. So that's exactly it. He's the last Navi and the beginning on Shekinah Sagdola.
Wow.
Okay. Anyway, so but that's what Reb Yaakov says, and he says, and then he talks about, that's already last week. We spoke about Reb Yaakov said that we sort of ended there in the middle that Rabbi Yochanan could have been a bigger Talmud Chacham, but on Shin Zion, which I think I gave you again this week, Shin Zion, right? He brings a Chazal that I mentioned last week in Masechet Chulin that Rabbi Yochanan says, I sat 17 rows behind Rav, and when Rav and Rebbe spoke in learning, right, I saw sparks of fire from his mouth to his mouth, his mouth to his mouth, and he says, Amri, and I don't know what they said. Okay, so for Rabbi Yaakov, right, Avahainu, he says, Sharav karov yoter el Rabbeinu HaKadosh. You have to say that he was closer to that kufa, but the emes is that even the Pashup Pshat, because what does that exactly mean, right? What it means is that in a new kufa, sometimes the people from the new kufa don't exactly understand what the people in the old kufa are really talking about. Right? I'm not going into the Gemara that says that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't understand what Rabbi Akiva was talking about, but that's already a strange Gemara. But this is Pashtus, what Rabbi Yaakov was referring to over here, is that Rav was closer, and therefore Rabbi Yaakov is going to continue on showing that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wanted Rav in his Tkufa. And he didn't necessarily want Reb Yochanan, but Rav is very clear from Gemaras that Rebbe wanted him yet in the Tkufas Tanoim. Now, the whole idea of Tkufas going down, Niskatnu Adoras, Reb Yaakov has a whole discussion on it. I skipped that discussion, but I'm not skipping it for good. I skip it because this is Reb Yaakov Tanach, so I skipped it, and that's already Reb Yaakov's a whole discussion about but I'm going to come back to it, okay? But I first want to finish up this idea of Reb Yaakov's idea, where he's getting it from Tanach. Today, Reb Yaakov is going to show from a pasuk that Shmuel HaNavi wrote about the old and new Tkufa. Very interesting what Reb Yaakov is about to say. But let's finish first on Shin Zion, okay? Shin Zion's... that's on the right-hand column, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines from the top. Rabbi Yaakov is still kvetching, but how is it that Rav? Okay, how does that happen that Rav? Venera the Mavur B'Gemara Gittin, Amar Rav, Ano Havai B'Minyona Devei Rebbe. Right? Uminoi didi manu bereisha. Rav says, I was amongst the minion of Dayanim, in other words, in the Beis Din of Rebbe. And from me, right? They started at the beginning. The kulo minyonayu minatzad havu matchilin. The Gemara says they always started counting from the side. Ayin Sham, Sharav Hayakotin Shababezdin Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Now, that's what Rashi says. Rashi has two pshatim there. One pshat is that Rav is describing himself that I was minatzad, I was from the side. Now, as you know, the Beis Din sat, I don't know, by the way, if in Rome they sat like this, but you could tell me, but the Beis Din sat like in a half circle, okay? And what it means is the head of the Beis Din sat in the middle, and then you had the quarter circle on one side, the quarter circle on the other side, and the last one of the circle, the minatzad, was the smallest guy, was the youngest guy, or the smallest one as far as the Talmud Chacham was concerned, right? So that's what Rav is saying over Sharav. You see from there, the Rav says that the kulo minyanayu minatzad havu matchilim. The Gemara says that Rav, when he said they started with me, because they always started with the smallest one. Because if they started with the biggest one, no one's going to argue. So they started so he was minatzad, Rashi says, because he was the smallest. Sharav hayakatan shebebezdin shel Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Rabbeinu HaKadosh hu zeh shechiber Sefer HaKolel. And Rabbeinu HaKadosh is the one that was mechaber. He calls it the Sefer HaKolel, right? Umatmetzet kol haTorah shebal peh, and he, from the word tamtzit, and he summarized all of Torah shebal peh. Ukmoshe ilfa amar sheyochel aros kol brayse hechin mekor b'mishnayis ayin ksuvis. Okay, I wouldn't have said ayin ksuvis. Maybe Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky said that. I'm not sure. Or Reb Yaakov said. I doubt Reb Yaakov would have said it. It's really the Gemara's in Tainus, okay? There's an interesting Gemara in Tainus, same Gemara, but there it tells you what happened in the story. Ilfa was an Amora in the time of Reb Yochanan, right? And Reb Yochanan was a Talmud yet of Yehuda Nasi. And there's a whole Gemara there that talks about they couldn't make a living, Reb Yochanan and Ilfa, so they decided to go into business. But Reb Yochanan came back to study Torah, and Ilfa stayed in business. And Ilfa heard like a call. It's not clear exactly. If I remember the Gemara correctly, he heard a call that Ilfa, if you had gone back to learning, you would have been so much greater. That's what it is. So Ilfa says he gets up on a ship with a mast, and he holds on to the stick that's holding on to the mast, the board, and not the board, the thick staff that's holding onto the mast, and he stands up and there he says, show me one brighter that I can't show you in the Mishnah that already says it. Every brighter I could show you, every Tosefta, every brighter I could show, it's already in the Mishnah, Merumas, and I could show it to you. In Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's. So what is Rabbi Yaakov saying over Shilfa Mashiachal Aros Kol Brisa Hechem Mekor Mishnah? It's unbelievable. In other words, everything we have, any brisa we have, even though sometimes you look at a brisa and you say, well, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi didn't write about it. It's there in the Mishnah, but it's very short in the Mishnah. You have to find it. By the way, there are Gemaras that actually say that. There are Gemaras that say that, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi meant X, referring to that brisa when he said this one word. You have that a lot of times. I remember in Kedushin you have it in Yoma, I remember in a lot of different places it says this. In other words, so Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's his Mishnah was extremely well written, and it included a lot of different things. You see from over here that this sefer was so complete, there was nothing to add. Because if you add the Tosefta, it's already in the Mishnah. Reb Chia and Reb Oshi, who wrote the Tosefta, which is a Tosfos on the Mishnah, it's all in the Mishnah. They just wrote it out, right? But according to what Ilfa says, Reb Yaakov takes it for a Dover Pashut, that it's already in the Mishnah. I don't know why Reb Yaakov didn't decide to show you a lot of different places where you see from the Mishnah, right, see from when a Gemara says something, and then all of a sudden the Gemara will say, and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was maramas this in the Mishnah. Diloke madua chiber sefer kishakol kishakol echad yochol lavol losif. He obviously wouldn't written a sefer that everyone's going to add to it. Ela sefer zeh chosam et atkufa uba pasak Rebbeinu Hakadosh Ador haba lo yichol achlok al ador shelo. Reb Yehuda Nasi, when he wrote the Mishnah, that was a psak halacha that from now on you can't argue anymore. Okay? And again, Reb Yaakov is of the opinion, the Gisha, that we didn't make that up. In other words, we didn't decide that. Reb Yehuda Nasi decided, Ravina Ravashi decided. Ubazen is chalku, and it's because of Merishonu Kamalachim, Anu Kabnei Adam. It's not because we're as great as them. To the contrary, we're not as great as them. Bazen is chalku amarayim and atnoyim. V'lomat came Reb Yehuda Nasi shechibur sefer mahava chavsimus tkufa, and Reb Yehuda Nasi learned that when you mechaber sefer, it becomes the end of tkufa mishmul anavi shechosam tkufas hashoftim she tkufa b'nei atzmo b'sharsheres mesiras haTorah alidei shekosav sefer shoftim. He learned it from Shmuel. U'memelim Rabbeinu Hakadosh Ichnis es Rav letoch beis dino hareu nosa lo amayim cheltana. If Reb Yehuda Nasi put Rav in his Beis Din, even though he was the last guy in the Beis Din, he was the last Rav in the Beis Din, right? He was minatzad, right? But he's in the Beis Din, so he has a din of a Tana. Reishu Nosan es Maimed Shel Tanik Rabbeinu Hakadosh Hu Shekova Shador Abar Eina Shaykh LeTanoim. He's the one who's koveya, nobody else. You could be a bigger lamdin than Rav. Rabbi Yochanan could be a bigger lamdin. But Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was koveya that he's part of the Tanoim, and Rabbi Yochanan is not. Nimtze shekasher godel hador mechaber sefer masakim es kol mashal lefanav harei osa b'zeh chisun letkufaso. The when the godel hador decides this, he makes a sefer being masakim. That's the end of the generation. And that's the end of the tkufa, and that's it. V'chiluke atkufa sa'idei gadol hador merumas shom begitten. And that same Gemara get v'amar Rabba b'rei derava b'teimer Rav Hillel b'rei derav valas miyamos Moshe v'ad Rebbe lo matzin Torah gedul makam echad amar Rav Acha b'rei derava af ani omer miyamos Rebbe v'ad Ravashi lo matzin Torah gedul makam echad ayin sham v'lachei Rebbe ki gadol hador. He proves that Rebbe was the Gadol Hador because it says Miyamos Moshe ad Rebbe lo hayeh. Moshe was definitely the Gadol Hador. There wasn't Torah Gdul Mochama, and then again Mimos Rebbe until Ravina and Ravashi. There wasn't anyone as great in Torah and Gedula, right? So he says from over here you see that the Gadol Hador decides. I don't know if today we know who the Gadol Hador is anymore. Right? Sometimes there's 2 or 3 of them. We're not exactly sure, right? But I know that when I was growing up, everybody told me it was the Chazon Ish. Now, Chazon Ish died, I think, the year I was born, if I'm not mistaken. But when I was growing up, everybody used to say this to me. Whether you're from Israel or even America, you would say the Chazon Ish was the last Gadol Hador, because then it got broken down into a few different people, the Gadol Hador. Whereas the Chazon Ish was the last word on everything. This is what I used to hear, at least. And this is what Michael quoted last week. Rebbe Reb Nosson Sof Mishnah, Ravashi Ravina Sof Hora'ah. Okay. Now I thought the Rambam says it. I checked the Rambam. He doesn't say it in those words. He uses different words. I think he did get it from the Gemara, but my Rambam is not one of those Frankel editions, so I have an old-fashioned Rambam. Nimtza Ravina v'Ravashi v'Chavrehem Sof Gedolei Chachmei Yisrael HaMatik and Torah Shabal Peh. Right? They are, Ravina Ravashi and their friends are the end of the Gedolei Chachmei Yisrael that wrote over Torah Shabal Peh. Right, so I think he got it from here, but you could check with the Rambam Lam or with Frankel edition and see what what he says over there. This is the last words on the page. This is so true. Now listen what he's about to say. Okay. Right? The Gemara says teku, right? And we have to let it stand. We can't prove one way or another what the halach is, right? You can't, the new generation can't come and say, like the Godim can't come and say, I have a riot to paskin the shaila. I can already figure out what the answer to teku is. Kemoshe kosa b'yam shel shlomo. The Marshal writes in Baba Kama, but didn't teku shenistama habaya b'talmud v'lo nifshut of ein reshus l'shum da'om ba'olam lepashta b'masnisim u'braita. He says that you can't even bring a mishnah or a braita to prove an answer to the teku. O misvara. Davi Kacholik al Talmud the Ravina Ravashi. You're arguing on Ravina Ravashi who left it as a teku. I mean, that's unbelievable if you think about it. I mean, we can understand that they left it as a teku, so the next generation would look into it. The Marshal says no. Shlomo Luria says chas v'shalom. They left it as a teku. That means you can't know. I remember saying it to Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. I remember he said to Reb Shlomo Zalman, Imam was the end of his lifetime, and he said, we can't decide if the woman carrying the baby is the mother or the egg is the mother. We'll never be able to decide it. Okay. By the way, Reb Zalman Nechemia Goldberg decided it by his son-in-law, but he said it can't be decided, and therefore you have to always do a gir l'chumra. In other words, because if the woman carrying the child, but it's not her egg, right? So maybe the baby goes after the egg, and the egg was non-Jewish egg, let's say in that case, right? Or the vice versa, right? Is the person who is carrying the egg is Jewish, right? And therefore the baby should be Jewish, right? So Reb Shlomo Zalman said we'll not be able to decide it. He can't bring a raya to it, right? Reb Zalman Nechemia brought a raya to it. I don't remember the raya, but it's in the journal Tchumim. But he didn't write an article in Tchumim. It's, I think, a footnote where he decides where that it's actually the person carrying it. Okay, so I told him about a case that I said I have a case where a woman got an insert of a sperm and an egg, right? And according to Reb Zalman Nechemia, I said to him, she doesn't have to do a gior because she carried the baby. The egg was from a non-Jew, right? So I said she's carrying the baby. So he says it's true that I hold that way, but she has to do a gior because nobody else holds that way. So he says that's what she has to do. I think Rav Asher Weiss holds that it's after the egg and not after the woman carrying, if I remember correctly. Anyway, the point is that that's like a similar type of case. The Ravina Ravashi left the teku, so the Marshal says you're not allowed to bring a proof from it. Like a tiyufta that said in the Talmud, tiyufta, the Rabbi Yochanan tiyufta, right? And the Gemara says so they knock them off from a brisa, right? You can't answer that because the Talmud didn't answer it. But there are certain things in the Talmud that it doesn't say teku or tiyufta. Maybe raya lepashta or rishus biyada azlinum basrei. You can, but the minute it says teku or tiyufta, you have no right because they paskin that it's a tiyufta, they paskin it's a teku. Okay, now let's go on. I'm not going to finish up this article. The article I just read you is not Reb Yaakov's handwriting. It's a translation from a shir he gave in the Brisker Kolo in Monsey. Okay, now I want to go into the final one. That's very important. This is a final aspect of how Reb Yaakov learns Tkufos, and he learns a new pshat in the text. I never found anybody who says this, right? And the Radak already raises the question in the 13th century, and till the 20th century, I never saw anybody who says this. Take a look. It says, as you know, I gave out the page Shmuel Aleph chapter Tes, And in there, it's the whole story about Shaul going to look for his donkeys. And of course, he meets Shmuel, and Shmuel tells him where the donkeys are, but he also crowns him as king, right? So it says like this in Pasuk Ches, Vayosef Hanar Lanos Shaul, Vayomer Hinei Nimtza Biyodi Reva Shekel Kosef, V'nasati Lisha Lokim V'Yigid Lanu Es Darkenu. Since we're lost and we can't find the donkeys, we'll give money to the Isha Lokim, and he'll tell us our path where we have to go, where the donkeys are, right? Because Shaul said we can't go ask the Isha Lokim because we don't have any money. He says, no, I have some change. We could give him. Of course, Shmuel didn't take any money. That he thought that Shmuel takes money. And then it says like this. There's a parenthesis. Lefanim Israel ko amara ish belechta lidrosh Elokim lechu v'nelcha haroa ki lanovi hayom mikarei lefanim haroa. At one time in Israel, when a person went lidrosh Elokim to search out God, he said lechu v'nelcha haroa. Let's go to the roa. Ki lanovi hayom yikarei lefanim haroa. Because for the navi today, used to one time be called, that navi was called a roa. And then, why does he say this? Because in the next few psukim, a few times, let's say in pasuk, end of pasuk Yudalef, Vayomelem Hayesh Bozeh Haroa, is the roa there? And they know, and the girls know exactly what he's referring to, right? They say Vatomarna Yesh Hine Lefanecha Maher Ataki Ayom Bo La'ir, right? And again, I think twice also later on, when Shaul meets Shmuel, right? When Shaul meets Shmuel, he asks him, one second, let me just see. He says like this, Hagidin oli eze beis haroe, pasik yudches, vayan Shmuel, vayom anochi haroe, right? So they use the word roe. So again, if you're reading Lahavdil, Shakespeare, right? And he uses a certain English word from I don't know, he was in the 1600s, Shakespeare? I don't remember. 1600s? Yeah. And he uses some words that I definitely don't understand, right? So the guy, Master Writer footnote, said this word was used in Old English and this. So here it says the same thing. L'fanim Israel, when a person wanted to see the Isha Lukim, where else do you have this pasuk? You have it in Ruth, right? Turn over the next page. V'zos lefanim b'Yisrael. I underlined it in chapter Dalet. And this lefanim b'Yisrael, the same exact language. Okay, don't forget it was written by the same person. Sefer Shmuel and Sefer this part of Sefer Shmuel and Sefer Ruth were written by Shmuel. Al geulav al tmur l'kayim kol dover sholof ishnal v'nosar arei v'zos hatuda b'Yisrael. When a person wanted to make a kinyan, right? He used to take off his shoe, and that was chlipin, the kinyan chlipin, right? So Reb Yaakov asks a bomb here. He says, wait a minute. Shmuel wrote Sefer Ruth. I understand. Lefanim b'Yisrael, they used to do a kinyan chlipin with a sandal. Today, maybe they don't do it. They use a handkerchief, they use something else. They used to do it with a sandal, right? How many years after did Shmuel write that Sefer? Probably at least a couple of 100 years for sure. Because even if we say Boaz is Iftzan, so there's still a lot of time. This Sefer was written after David HaMelech was being questioned, right? After he crowned him king in hiding, but he crowned him king. That's the whole yichus of David HaMelech at the end over here. So we're talking 100 years. So he says 100 years ago, they used to use a sandal for chlipin. Okay, let's go back to Shmuel. Shaul was king according to the Chazal. Okay, Shaul was 2 years. 2 years, according to the Chazal. And Shmuel died before Shaul. Okay, Shmuel died. How do we know? Because Shaul conjures him up with the Baal Asov. So Shmuel died before Shaul. So when did Shmuel write this? About a year and a half before. Right? In other words, he died. In this chapter, he anoints Shmuel as king. He anoints Shaul as king. Right? And he dies less than 2 years after this because he died before Shaul, dies. right? So it's about, let's say, a year and a half. So Lifanim B'Yisrael, a year and a half ago, they used to call, right, a Novi Aroa. A little bit strange, no? A year and a half ago, right? I don't think in Shakespeare, the guy who wrote up Shakespeare, Lahavdil, wrote after a year and a half, they don't use this word anymore. And people won't know about it. I doubt it. Okay? But so Reb Yaakov says, doesn't make any sense. Okay? This is what Reb Yaakov is going on over here. So he says like this. Where am I here? Okay. Here. So chapter test, pasuk test, Shin Nun Ches. Okay? Lefanim B'Yisrael. Ko amar aish belechta lidrosh elokim l'chu v'nel chadaroa. V'inei loshen zeh meshuneh ma'od. Very strange. By the way, this is handwritten of Reb Yaakov. Bishlei Megillas Ruz. So it's Lefanim B'Yisrael. Shayach shapeh loshen zeh sharei kosav hasefer Shmuel hanavi. V'uv dezu the Boaz ha'isek kabei shana kodem ksivus hasefer. It's 100 years before. So things change in 100 years. Masha'enke b'pasuk zeh shaya korav l'tchilas malchusai. Shel Shol ksivus hasefer haya al idei Shmuel shemeis kodem shenerag Shol umalchusa to shtei shanim lefi das seder olam va'afilu nemar shenimshcha yud ches shana kedas habar benel gam ken kosher lechanos meshach hazman kazeh b'shem lefanim. Lefanim is not the word to use a year and a half ago. Okay, so va'ayin radak shehirgish zeh avalo evanti mashakosef. I didn't understand what he's writing. Okay, you'll take a look at the Radak. Maybe next week we'll take a quick look at it. But the Radak wants to claim that they used it lifanim and they used it today also. No, lifanim many years before, and they used it today also. But it doesn't really fit very well because if they're using it today, so why are you explaining it? We know it from then, we know it from here. But so we're not going to go into the Radak now. Avlo vanti mashakasa. Umalo lekosav hasefer lahagdim pasuk zeh. Why does he have to add this pasuk? V'mishum sheshol sha'al eiz beis harov v'chadomeh lo hayalo lo sif pasuk zeh. Just because Shaul asked eiz beis haroa, or he said to the girls, where is the roa? Right? Is the roa in the city? Right? If it's a year and a half. He wrote the Sefer a year and a half later. They don't have to explain that. But nearly the hey name what's in Bereish Masech Davos. Here goes Reb Yaakov with the Tkufas. Moshe Kibbutz Torah Misinai. Umasor Yeshua. Yeshua L'Skenim. Skenim Neviim. Vim Masur Lanchik Nasagdol. V'inei. Haskenim Shezocha B'Mishnah Zu Al Korchach. The Koi Ashoftim Shenisku B'Sefer Shoftim. Again, Reb Yaakov sticking with a shita that when it says Skenim Neviim, it's talking about the Shoftim. By the way, the fact that it's repeated here, Reb Yaakov didn't write a sefer. I want to be clear. I told you the first day, he wrote notes, right? So if he wrote a note on Shmuel Aleph, right, on the first Rashi, that was in a different Kufa, literally, it could be 50 years later, he wrote this piece, okay? If I'm not mistaken, the piece on Shmuel Aleph was written after this piece, in fact. So that's why he goes through this again, right? The Rav Bartanura, L'skenim show you Acha Yoshua, but also Askenim L'skenim Acherim, Achigil Chilas Moshe Leviim. Right? He says they gave it to other Skenim who are the Shoftim, and because there was Skenim at the time of Yoshua, and then other Skenim who were the Shoftim. V'inei, L'fein Estaita, Mitchila Misha Yerosha Makablim Hu Haya Shofet. The one who was in charge of Kabbalas HaTorah was the Shofet. K'moshe bi'arti makam acher she'ein bein Shofet lemelech ela shemalchusa shel melech hu kinyano u'rechusho u'lefikach hu morisha levanav. Like I write in another place, and that other place we're going to learn because it's a big place. Okay, like that the difference between a melech and a Shofet is that the melech, the malchus is his kinyano urechusho. It belongs to him. Whereas the Shofet is never morish his malchus to his children, his shoftus to his children. He never does that. Whereas the king, it becomes his kinyan, his rechush, right? By the way, that's why he says, Rabbi Yaakov says, that the Rambam says, if you mavaza melech Yisrael, you chayiv misa, okay? If you mavaza a shofet, right? You give a personal bezoyin to the shofet, you're not chayiv misa, because the malchus is not his. It doesn't belong to him, that malchus. Masha'enken ha-shofet hu memali tafkid malchus shamayim. He's not his own. He has none of his own covered. He's doing malchus shamayim. Ulefikach hayibochim keish shezocha lios rosh hamakam moshem dor shalachrav. They always chose a person to be the shofet, one who was the rosh mekablim. Oh, he was the person giving over the Torah. Ve'im haya az isha lukin hayikorna so b'shem roa. And if that person who was the Mosrei Torah was a shofet, but he was also a navi, they called him a roa. V'acharkach shamalchus nasa b'Yisrael. That then, when the malchus came into being in time of Shaul, lashlit dinei Torah haTorah b'Yisrael, oz is chila haMesora lavar al yidei haNeviim. Shemo yimorim lemelech dinei haTorah v'chol asfeika shenaflo manhogas ha'uma. Then the Mesora went over to the Nevi'im. It went from the Shoftim to the Nevi'im. It happened to be that Shmuel was both, right? So he was sort of like the bridge. He was the last Shofet and the first Navi. But it went over to the Nevi'im. Shehemo yumorim lemelech dinei haTorah. They're the ones who taught the Melech dinei haTorah. V'chol asfeika shenaflu banhogas ha'uma. And any suffix that came about with regard to the nation, the Melech had to go to him to decide. Like, for instance, Rabbi Yaakov says it, I think he may say it here too, but he certainly says it in other places, that when David wanted to build the Beis HaMikdash, he goes to Nassan and asks him, what do you need his permission for? There's a mitzvah to build the Beis HaMikdash. So why are you asking Nassan? Go and build it. He asks Nassan. First Nassan says yes, then he says no. We'll get into that another time. And then when the Navi became the Mosrei HaTorah, one of the Mosrei HaTorah, the Nevi'im came Mosrei HaTorah, they started calling them Nevi'im, not anymore Roim. Therefore, at the time of Shmuel himself, right, the kinui for Navi and Roa changed. Ki kodem shemolach shol shaya Shmuel hashofet loya nikru b'shei Navi ki im hayitzrichim lo bedover shein totally b'kiyim ha-mitzvah kiyim ladas im nimtzu ha-asodos, because if someone needed the Navi, right, someone needed the Navi to find his donkeys, right, that's not a gate of Klal Yisrael. That's a private enterprise. The guy walks in, he says, listen, I lost my wife's ring, her diamond. Please tell me where it is, right? That has nothing with Klal Yisrael. That's why he was called a roa, a seer. He sees, right? V'az kinuhu b'shem roa b'nei she'ein zeh b'dinei hanhogas hamedina. It had nothing. In other words, there was no the hanhogas hamedina was in the hands of the shofet, right? But when it switched, right? It switched, right? So it was the hand of the shofet. So he was called the roa aval hayom, right? Koloma b'shas ksivas pasuk zeh kvar ischilu malchus shol mayatu nikra b'shem Navi. Now he's called Navi. So lifanim b'Yisrael, right? The Navi, when someone went to see the Navi, he called Isha Lukim, called him the roa. What is the lifanim? It's a year and a half ago. No, it's the old Kufa. In the old Kufa, right? Lifanim b'Yisrael is not in time. It's in Kufas. In the old Kufa, the Navi was called the roa. So someone went to see, and that's why the Shmuel is putting it in here, because the change is going to take place right here, right? Shmuel wants you to know that he went from wearing the hat called roa to Navi, because a Navi is, Reb Yaakov, I remember you say, a Navi is a lerer, is a teacher. And that's why the Nevi'im, in the Kusa Nevi'im, the Nevi'im come to the Jewish people and they mussar them out and they teach them how they should act properly and do the mitzvos, right? That's a Navi. And by the way, he discusses the etymology of the word too, Navi, but we're not going there right now. But the point Reb Yaakov is saying is here, Here you see a changing of a tkufa in the pasuk, because in the old tkufa he was called a roa, because it wasn't, the Mesiras HaTorah wasn't in the hands of a navi, of a Ishalakim. It was in the hands of someone who was the greatest Talmud Chacham, right? He happened to be a navi. You called him a roa. That was a private enterprise. He had a magic trick that he could do for you, but had nothing to do with Klal Yisrael, and that's why Shaul goes. Shaul goes to him to find out where his donkeys are. Could you imagine today going to Rav Asher Weiss and saying to him, "Listen, I lost my wife's diamond ring. Please tell me where it is." Right? It's not negayah to Klal Yisrael. It's negayah to yourself. Okay, yeah. Okay, if you have a private shaila in halacha, but to ask where to find something in your house, can you give me an idea where I should look for my wife's diamond ring? Right? By the way, the Gra Vilna says, the Gra in Mishlei says, when someone wanted to find out what his tafkid was in life, he used to go to Shmuel Hanavi. He writes it. He went to Shmuel Hanavi, right? And now that we don't have it, we have to use Ruach HaKodesh. But they used to ask, what is my tafkid, right? It was a private conversation. You went with the Navi, the Roa. Now that he made Shaul the king, Shaul couldn't be part of the Mesiras HaTorah, as Rabbi Yaakov said, because kings inherit the kingdom to another child, and we don't know if he'll be fitting to be Moshe HaTorah. So it went into the hands of the Nevi'im, and we see that the Nevi'im were in charge of making sure the Malchus runs al pi Torah, right? So if David HaMelech did something wrong, Nassan musses him out. If he wants to build the Beis HaMikdash, he has to ask Nassan. And in the beginning of Sefer Malachim, Nassan comes to him and says, "Did you want Adonio as king? You didn't tell me." Well, David should say to him, "I have to tell you who I want as king? Who are you?" No, David doesn't say that. He says, "No, I never meant Adonio should be, Shlomo should be king," right? But Nassan asks him as if he asks him like a bomb. How could you not tell me if you want him king? He makes for a double pasha. You have to discuss with me who has to be the king amongst your children, right? So Das Torah was the Navi, right? You had to go to the Navi. He says, "Oh, that's what it means, two tkufos." You have the one tkufa, right, where the Navi was just a private citizen, and if Dvorah happened to be a Navi, right? If Dvorah happened to be a Navi, she happened to be a Navi, but she was a shofet. The shofet were giving the Torah one over to the other, right? And if Shmuel happened to be a Navi, which he was, a very significant Navi, but that was not significant to being a shofet. The shofet was a Moshe Torah, and the Navi was a Navi just to tell you, like he does. He goes to Eli and he gives him Musar. He goes to Jewish people, he gives them Musar all the time, right? But that was something that a Navi did as a private person. Shmuel was a private person when he did that. He did it like he happened to be a Talmud Chacham who was also a Navi. Then the Mesiras HaTorah, when he crowned Shaul, in this chapter, when he crowned Shaul king, at that moment, his status changed. Ki lanavi hayom yikareh lefanim. In the last kufa, roeh. That's what the pasuk means over here. It doesn't mean, it could mean in Sefer Ruth also the same thing in the Tkufa, but it doesn't have to, because there could be, it's 100 years. But here, Reb Yaakov is saying, we're not talking about years. It's only a year and a half, but it doesn't matter. He's trying to tell you a yesod in the changing of hands. And that's Lefanim, and that's Hayom. That could be a year and a half. In the old Kufa, he was one thing. New Kufa was another thing. That's what Reb Yaakov here says a Chiddush. And by the way, nobody really has a good shot until I saw Reb Yaakov. There's no Reb Yaakov. I remember when he was Machadish it, and he told me I was Machadish something that I think is Emes Lamito, right? The Abarbanel says that Yirmiyahu wrote it. Yirmiyahu put it in. He doesn't know how to get around it, right? So he says Yirmiyahu put it. He asks the same question as the Radak, that how could it be a year and a half, right? Or even 18 years? The Abarbanel says L'shitosha 18 years. It says it can't be. So you have to say, but it's very strange because it's the same language as Sefer Shoftim. So it sounds like Shmuel is writing it, because Shmuel definitely wrote that in Sefer Shoftim. Else you're going to have to say that Yirmiyahu wrote that in Sefer Shoftim as well, right? But this is the Ksav Yad of Shmuel Hanavi. This is his mark. Then he gives it parentheses.
So Rabbi Shurin,
Yeah.
the people that were alive at that time.
So we now have the question period.
So
correct?
if you don't mind, I can wait.
No, because it's over. Yeah.
Oh, okay. If the people who were alive at that time, it would still be strange for them to see. I mean, they knew how to use the word roeh, and now you're telling them, no, we're switching language, we're switching titles. So just for that, like first generation, it was kind of a strange thing because it didn't say. I'm asking. I'm not saying.
All right.
It wasn't explicit here. It doesn't say, and now we're changing tkufas. So the way they said it was just by the name.
It just says Lifanim Israel at one time in Israel, right? Kilanovi Hayom, right? Yikore Lifanim Haroeh, right? So what's your question?
My question is, I mean, it is very strange. I guess I'm just asking. I guess there's no way to know. How did people at that time? It's sort of like if you were writing a book in Spain when they switched over from their old money to the euros. The people were alive, they know it. But they could be, if the government put out a brochure about how to use the money, they would say, until recently, we used the peseta, but now we use the euro. So for the people around there, they're like, of course we know pesetas, but they're trying to just explain to you, we're no longer using this money.
Correct.
Okay, I'm just saying.
But here we're really doing more. We're trying to explain to you that there's a real change in tkufas. In other words, in the halachic tkufas, there's a real change, right? So it's not just like, the old shekel and the new shekel. We're using an old shekel and new shekel, right? We're saying that there's a qualitative difference here. Shmuel changed positions. He is now he's the minister. He's the minister of religion. And before he was the Moser HaTorah.
Okay.
Right? So that's what Reb Yaakov is claiming. And then you don't have a question of it's only a year and a half. It's a different kufa. Who cares a year and a half? It's like a year, like Ravina and Ravashi would say, right? Ravina and Ravashi would say, if they were alive after they published the Talmud, they were alive. So he would say, this is the kufa is ending. And there's people alive in the new tkufa, not part of their tkufa, right? They say you can't argue because that's a new tkufa, and we decided the tkufa ended. But guy says, "Look, I know you guys. I know you rabbis. We're good friends. We argue about everything. Yeah, but right now, an hour before, I can argue on you. Right now, it's over. You can't argue on me anymore." Okay. Right? In other words, till Ravina Ravashi or Rabbi Danasi wrote his Mishnah. People would argue on Rabbi Danasi, no problem. You argue on the Tkufas HaTanoim. Then all of a sudden, he stopped it. Now you can't all of a sudden. The same guy who last year argued. No, it's theoretically, you can get a fellow who had an argument with Rabbi Danasi, and Rabbi Danasi had to take him seriously. It was a year and a half ago. And that same guy, that same Rav today, Rabbi Danasi says, I'm not listening to you anymore. That's it. It's over. But he says, last year we had a discussion and you listened to me. Well, there was a new tkufa, right? That's the change.
But from Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, it doesn't sound like it works like that. It sounds like Rav and Rabbi Yochanan went on to have lots of machlokosim after the change of the tkufa.
Correct. That's true, actually. In other words, Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan claimed, this is what Tosfos says in Ksuvas, that Rabbi Yochanan claimed that even though Rav is a Tanu Polik, but he has a din of an Amora also. So you can't say I can't argue on him. He's a Tana and an Amora. Whereas with Shmuel, right? I don't know if there's such a Hechet Timtza. Shmuel was the Moser HaTorah as a Shofet, and I was the Moser HaTorah as a Navi, right? So I don't know if there's the same type of Hechet Timtza, but that's the reason why. I don't remember if Reb Yaakov says it here, but I remember, hearing Reb Yaakov talking about this, that Tosfos holds that Rabbi Yochanan, take a look at that Tosfos, very interesting Tosfos, that Rabbi Yochanan held that, no, even though you're Tanu Polik, but by me, you're still an Amora. In other words, you're both, if I could argue. So I'm not exactly sure how that would work out with Shmuel, being both. He's both a Shofet and he's also a Navi. In other words, I'll tell you where the nafkamina could be. The nafkamina could be after he's Moshe HaMelech, right? And Shaul becomes king. Does he lose the Dinei Shofet? In other words, is does he lose the din shoftim, which may be a nafkamina halacha. I'll give you an example. When we learn the difference between shoftim and malachim, we'll talk more about this. Reb Yaakov has nafkaminas, right? For instance, if the shofet decides that college has to go out to war, and some guy decides no, he's not going, the shofet has a right to kill him. Now, if the Navi came and said you have to go out to war, and the guy didn't want to listen, right? Do you kill the guy? Right? Maybe you don't. Maybe he's not a shofet anymore. If the melech says it, you do kill. But I told you the difference between a shofet and a melech is only with regard to, Reb Yaakov says it's with regard to personal status, right? The what do you call it? The shofet has no personal status. He's just representing God. Right? He has no person. By the way, Reb Yaakov proves this from Sukkah and Tanach. I want to tell you something interesting. I think it was 1937. Reb Yaakov went to Boston, okay? And if I'm not mistaken, Rev Hershel Shechter even records this. But I think Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky also records it in a footnote. Reb Yaakov went to Rev Soloveitchik, and he said, let's open up a yeshiva together. You'll be the Rosh Yeshiva and I'll be the Mashgiach in the yeshiva. Now, Reb Yaakov didn't have, he had a job in Lithuania, but he knew he can't make a living. That's why he came to America. So he had a great idea. Reb Yoshe Soloveitchik was very recently in America. He was younger than Reb Yaakov, and Reb Yaakov was willing to say to him, you'll be the Rosh Yeshiva, I'll be the Menahel Ruchani. Now, Reb Yoshe, according to, I never heard this from Reb Yaakov. I think I heard it from Hershel Shechter. Is that Rav Hershel Shechter says that Reb Shaber told him, I'm not ready to open up a yeshiva because I'm now becoming the Rav of Boston. I'm too taken up with my time. I can't really do it. But at that time, Reb Yaakov told him over his Dvar Torah on the difference between Shofet and Melech. That's what he told him. And he said it in a brisker way to impress Reb Yoshe. So I think my father, after he became son-in-law of Reb Yaakov, my father was a student of Reb Yoshe too. So he asked Reb Yoshe, did he ever talk in learning with Reb Yaakov? So he says, I know for sure that he knows Tanach. That he said, he told me of Dvar Torah, I could see he knew all of Tanach when he told me the Dvar Torah. That I know, because he said over that Dvar Torah. But he didn't say anything else for sure. I know for sure he knows Tanach, right? Because they never really spoke in learning. Even if they met, they hardly ever spoke in learning. They spoke about Inyonei Klal and stuff like this. But Reb Yoshe was in a different world than Reb Yaakov. Reb Yaakov was in the world of Aguda. Reb Yoshe was in the world of Mizrahi. It was like a different world. But the point is, that Dvar Torah that he told them over, we have. We have that Dvar Torah. Reb Yaakov wrote it over, and we have it. We'll go through it. And during that time, Reb Yaakov said it to me, he told me something was a mechilta erag me'obgenar. He fooled me. Because I asked him, how could Yoshua have been a melech? The Rambam counts Yoshua as a melech. He says he was a melech. He didn't have Mashiach. A melech has to have Mashiach. The Rambam writes it. You have to have Mashiach. We now find he had Mashiach. So Rabbi Yoshe said, there's a mechilta that says he had Mashiach. And Rabbi Yaakov didn't find it in the mechilta. So he says, he fooled me. There's no mechilta like that. I found it in a sifrei. Okay, and if I'm not mistaken, Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky publishes the whole in a note that whole thing that we found it in a sifrei. That what he said is in a sifrei. It's not in a mechilta, or it was the opposite. He said it's a sifrei, but then we found it in a mechilta. I don't remember, but that was the story. So he told me a little bit about his interaction with Yoshe, but he didn't tell me everything. I didn't get everything from him, but that was the Dvar Torah he said. And so again, it could be that once Shmuel was Moshech, the Shaul as king, he lost his right to be a shofet. It could be, right? I'm not sure. I have some sfeikis about it, but it could be. In other words, all the dinim of shofet didn't apply to him anymore. And Reb Yaakov talks about which didn't apply to a shofet and which apply to melech and what the difference is. And when we see that, we'll be able to re-raise this question, really. This question about that Daniel was referring to, like, okay, what changes over here with regard to Shmuel? Does he lose his being a shofet, right? By the way, the Mishnah Lamelech asks the question when Shmuel's Moshech David, the show loses Malchus. Is he now a Melech bli Malchus? He has a big suffix about it, right? When David becomes king, even though he's not actually acting as king, right? So does now he loses all his dinei Malchus? And if I'm Morid B'Shol, I'm not a Morid B'Malchus anymore. No, he's still a Melech. And maybe you have two Melachim at the same time, or you have David didn't become Melech because nobody knows about it yet. So maybe he's not really doesn't get the dinei Malchus yet. It's not clear. The Mishnah Melech has a whole discussion in the Prussia Strachim, the Sefer wrote Prussia Strachim. He has a whole discussion. I don't remember what the discussion is, but he has a whole discussion on it. Right? Any other questions? Points? Yes, Max.
I'm not exactly sure what the question is yet, but I'm interested in what you were saying, the relationship between David and Nasan Navi, because David is himself listed as one of the Nevi'im in the Gemara.
That's correct. That's correct. That's a good point. David is listed as one of the Nevi'im, right? But it seems that the fact that he had Malchus with him means that he has to listen to because David was a Navi, but he wasn't Navi Ha'am. He was a private Navi. He became a Navi through the Mesilas Yesharim, right? The last chapter, the Mesilas Yesharim, is you get to Nevuah. He doesn't say exactly that everybody gets there, but he says you can get to Nevuah at the last chapter. So he was a private Navi. I think that's what Reb Yaakov would say. The Navi Ha'am or Shmuel, because a Melech can't also be a Navi. He can't also be the Navi Ha'am. By the fact that he has Malchus, it divided up. In the period of the Shoftim, it was both. And that shows how great the Shofet was. He had the Shofet and he was the Moser HaTorah. The whole thing was split afterwards. It was split for technical reasons, but it tells you how great the Shofet was, that he had both. And David, even though he was a Navi, he still had to ask, Nasan HaNavi, which is very interesting. You see it. I mean, what Reb Yaakov saying is very clear. He asks Nasan if he should build the Beis HaMikdash. Well, I'm a Navi, so I should get a dream and go build the Beis HaMikdash. The controversy, by the way, is, and that we'll learn about, I'll have to show it to you inside, is that Nasan HaNavi says to David, right? Kol asher b'levavcha ta'aseh, right? And then he goes to sleep, Nasan, and God says to him, not so fast, Nasan. He's not going to build a Beis HaMikdash. His son is going to build it. He goes back and he tells him, don't build it, David. So first he tells him to build it, right? When David has, then he says not to build it. He had a nevuah and he shouldn't build it, right? So Reb Yaakov has a piece on this. It's a very strange thing. What? Nasan tells him not to build it, right? And now he has a dream. So what was he before? He wasn't a Navi before. He was a Navi. He told him not to. He told him to build it. And now as a Navi, he told him not to build it. So Reb Yaakov differentiates between Das Torah and Nevuah. He says the Navi was the minister of religion. He had Das Torah. But in Das Torah, the Navi could be wrong. That's what he writes. And that's where the controversy comes in. Nobody wants to quote that Reb Yaakov. In Das Torah, you can make a mistake. Das Torah can make a mistake. But in Nevuah, you can't make a mistake unless you're a fake Navi, because you got a Nevuah from Hashem. So that we'll have to learn inside, because I got to show you the way Reb Yaakov wrote it. And he wrote it with, that's Reb Yaakov's own writing. And Reb Yaakov didn't have a problem with the Das Torah making a mistake. Very interesting. Because today in the yeshiva world, if you say that, you are not anymore in the yeshiva world. Okay? You're finished. That's it. You're lucky if you're alive, but you're not in the yeshiva world. That's for sure. Right? The Das Torah can make a mistake.
One last little question.
Sure.
Just the language of the psukim, it's not so simple. If Nabi Yisrael Karulun Navi Ro'eh makes it sound like it's a change of title, but not of tafkid. It sounds like the same thing was called something different.
It sounds like, oh, you mean that it was the same thing?
Yeah, it means
right.
it was the same thing, but it's called something different.
Right.
That's what the pasuk sounds like.
They're using, like in Lahavdil, like I said in Shakespeare, they're using a different word for that word, right? That's what you mean, right?
Yeah.
But not that something actually changed, right?
Right. No,
Reb
so it sounds like a Mahuti change.
He's saying That's exactly the point. He's saying that, here it's not anymore. It's like in Sefer Ruth, right? They don't use that as a kinyan anymore. In other words, it's not using it for whatever reason. It's not just tech. They decided that's not the way the kinyan should work. You should use something else, not a shoe anymore, right? For whatever reason, they decide. So here also, it's not a question of just changing a name. It was a decision, a changing of a status, right? But you're right. If you read the psukim very simply, it sounds like they just changed the name, and you just need a footnote saying we changed the name, right? But Reb Yaakov says, why write it over here, right? Why write it dafka over here? This idea, right? The whole roa, making an issue of saying the roa 3 times, right? By the way, Reb Yaakov says, you see that the Navi was very loyal to what really was stated, because he could have used a different word. He could have used Ishalokim, right? It wouldn't have been throwing anybody off if he used Ishalokim instead of Roa, but he wanted to quote Shol, right? And the Pashup shot is, you're right, that now we use the word Navi, right? So, but why did it change? In other words, we have to really ask that question. Okay, why did you change from Roa to Navi, right? That's what Reb Yaakov was bothered with. If it's just a change of a name, so why change? It's so bad to have used the word Roa. So he says, no, because the tafkid changed, because we call the Nevi'im, right? We call them the Nevi'im, right? We don't call them Roam because they have a different tafkid. That's what Reb Yaakov is really. That's what's really forcing Reb Yaakov is, why did it change it, right? So we could theoretically say today when words change, you could say, we don't know why. I asked somebody once, I wanted to, me and Cinnamon wanted to create a new word, Max's wife. Well, she was working as my assistant. So me and Cinnamon started sitting down and saying, let's create a new word that no one ever used before. So we decided on another word for being angry. I'm packed. I'm really packed at you. And I started using it in my email, right? And it didn't work. People wrote me back and said, what do you mean, Rabbi Shurin, you're packed? I don't get it exactly. So I said, you didn't hear that we're now using packed instead of anger. I was angry at this person. I'm packed at them, right? Me and Cinnamon did that. So then I did research, and I found out the only way a word can change if it's used in the movies. If it's used in the movies, that's where all these words change. What they use when you hear a person saying that's really cool, it's probably because it was used in a movie, right? When I first heard that, I didn't know what they're talking about. Wow, that's so cool, right? Because when I heard the word cool, it was always on a human being. It was always on a gavra, not on a chefza. It was always on the gavra. The gavra was a cool guy, right? But all of a sudden now, that's such a cool thing, right? Like with the what do you call it? The beepers. I said to one of the women, what did you think of it? She said, I thought it was so cool. Today, I asked the woman, what did you think? That was so cool. So we never used the word cool in the 70s like that. That thing was so cool. The guy was a cool guy, right? So it changed because probably in the movies, I don't know which movie, they probably used the word cool. You could probably Google it and find out today, right? That's how things change. Okay, but that's the way you change a word. But this is what Reb Yaakov was saying. Why change the word? Why does the Navi have to change the word? Keep him as a row. The answer is because the status changed. Okay, we'll stop here, guys. We'll take it up next week.
Rabbi Shurin,
Thank you
we have
very
Monday,
much.
right? No, we don't have next week. Because after Rosh Hashanah, I'm giving a special share. Is that correct?
Yeah, I want to call you about that right now, if that's okay.
Okay, you can call me right now, but I'm probably not going to give it because I have my normal yahrzeit share. I think it's the 20 year?
25th.
25th year. I have to give that share, even though it's on October 7th, which is a little bit. I'm going to talk about October 7th on that. I'm making a topic as to
Information will go out to everybody very bakarov.
Okay, be well, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
A great year. And of course, it be peace on Klal Yisrael. We all want our sons-in-law home and our children home, and Bezrat Hashem, we should be victorious, and we should really have peace throughout the land. Take care.
Amen.
All right, Shana Tova.